Yeah, sure.
Okay, welcome everybody. Today we are going to cover question and answers on Adobe Lightroom. The full name of Adobe Lightroom is Adobe Photoshop Lightroom. It started from basically a part of Photoshop. I'll explain how it really evolved into the present day Lightroom. Let me start with the questions itself, because some of the questions itself ask for that particular uh, difference between Photoshop and Lightroom. So one of the question was whether we can change the background of a photo in a Lightroom. Now, there are some ways how we can change the background. That is basically we can alter the background, we can adjust the brightness, contrast, and color, white balance, and all those things are possible with the Lightroom. But you can't replace it with something else. For example, let's say that uh, in a Lightroom, your sky is pretty bad. So you can't replace that sky with some other sky. For that, you need Photoshop. Now, to come back, um, Photoshop allows you to manipulate pixels, whereas Lightroom doesn't allow you to manipulate pixels. And that's the reason why uh, Photoshop and Lightroom both go together. They are distinct programs, but you need to go from Lightroom to Photoshop to do something which is where you are altering the pixel. But if you are trying to change the value of a pixel within the picture, then Lightroom is a better tool. Uh, I'll explain that further because there are three questions here. Whether we can change the background? No. In Lightroom, you can't change the background in a literal sense. Like you can't take somebody else's somewhere else's background. For example, you take a photograph of a wildlife in a zoo, and then you take a background from a national park and you change it. No, it's not possible in Lightroom. There are other softwares. Photoshop is the best example where you can change the background pretty easily. That is because the Lightroom doesn't have layers in a literal sense. You can't have multiple layered photograph. In Photoshop, what we do is we put a new layer which has got a new background, and then we allow the existing layer to overlay on that particular layer, and that way we can change a particular part of the photograph into something else. Now, the second question which Bhageshri asked is how to edit raw files in Lightroom. In fact, Lightroom was created only to edit raw files. JPEG, you can also edit it, but it is mainly to edit raw files. Remember, Photoshop was created about 27 years back. At that time, there was no digital camera. The cameras were film cameras, and people used to scan film cameras. Also, Photoshop was more of a graphic tool for graphic designers to manipulate pixels. Now, when the digital photography came, people started shooting in JPEG. That was the first format which they started using. And they also started using what's called a raw file. Raw file is a direct information right from the sensor. This file was proprietary. For example, Canon had its own raw file called CR2 and now CR3. Nikon has their own raw file called NEF. Sony, if you go, they have ARW. Fuji has got its own format, and Panasonic and Olympus, they have their own formats. Now, all these formats can be edited in Lightroom. In fact, it's a best choice if you want to edit raw files. Among all the other raw editors, probably in the paid raw editor arena, you have plenty of other raw editors. For example, Capture One is another one more. Luminar is another one. You have On One Pro. You have free softwares like Raw Therapy, Darkroom, Darktable. There's so many softwares are there, but among that, Lightroom is one of the better of the programs. Now, the third question really links to the second question: how to go from a bridge to Photoshop and bridge to Lightroom. Now, what is a bridge? Now, don't think of a bridge on a river. Bridge is a program by Adobe where you open up a raw file in a Photoshop. What it does is it opens directly in Bridge. It doesn't open in Photoshop because Photoshop cannot read raw files. Now, Photoshop requires a bridge, and Bridge and Lightroom are both exactly same. The underlying engine is called the Camera Raw engine. So both of them use the same engine, and using the same engine, what they do is they have got a different interface. The Bridge has a different interface as compared to Lightroom's interface. But other than that, both are exactly same. Now, in fact, I'll give you a small tip. If you don't want to pay for Lightroom, if you don't want to pay for Photoshop, you want everything free, just download Bridge. The Bridge can open raw files. You can do all the editing which is possible in a Lightroom. You can add plugins just like Lightroom. You can add preset just like Lightroom. And Bridge is totally free. Adobe doesn't charge you for Bridge. What it does is it charges you for Photoshop. It charges you for Lightroom. And when you buy both of them, the Bridge is free. But you can install just Bridge itself and you can run it forever. There are few drawbacks. For example, you won't be able to do a pixel edit just like what you did in Photoshop. You won't be able to have search capability just like what is there in the Lightroom. But it's a very capable program, and I'll show you what really happens. Let me come out of this sharing, and I have a folder here on my desktop which has got all the files for today, and I'm going to click on one of the raw files. So let me open up this particular raw file. Let me share this page. Um, Photoshop here. So this is showing me standard screen of a welcome camera raw. Now this is the engine what you get, which works for both Bridge as well as Lightroom. The camera raw is the one where all the processing starts for every raw file. So all the information about the raw file is within this camera raw engine. The camera raw doesn't have its own interface. Interface when you combine with the Photoshop is this. This is the Bridge interface what you're seeing, and so this Bridge interface allows you to show all the different editing capability of a file. So you can change the white balance here. This is a JPEG file, so I can change the white balance as I want, and I can change the temperature. I can make it cooler. I can make it warmer. If there is a tint, I can change the tint. In this case, there is no tint, so I'm not going to change the tint. When I'm going to change the exposure, for example, this is overexposed slightly. So if I bring it back, that's sort of underexposed. Somewhere here, it's a correct exposure. I can also change all the different parameters exactly like how the Lightroom does. So Bridge is a program which basically exactly like Lightroom, but it is a part of Photoshop. So if you just have a Photoshop, you need to have a Bridge and a Photoshop. Now, at the end of this, there are several parameters. One of the parameter is how you want to open the file. Usually what I choose is 16 bits and then keep everything same except this Adobe RGB. I make it into a ProPhoto RGB, say OK, and then I open the image. Now, when I open the image, what happens is it opens in Photoshop. Now we see it is now in Photoshop. Sorry, these are all the other images which I opened earlier in Photoshop. Close it. Yeah. So this is how it opened in uh, Photoshop. Now, uh, in Lightroom, it is totally different. When we go to Lightroom, what really happens is Lightroom doesn't open just like this. Like if you double click something, open in Lightroom, no, it doesn't work. Lightroom has what's called a catalog, and inside that catalog, you have to import files. So Lightroom doesn't know that there are files inside your uh, laptop or a hard disk, and you need to import that particular files for Lightroom to know that they exist. So I don't want to go in detail because most of you have used Lightroom, but generally, if you want, I can conduct another basic Lightroom workshop for those who are still unfamiliar with Lightroom's interface. So now to answer this particular question, let me show you Lightroom. Now let me slow down 1 minute. Just wait for me to start the Lightroom. So this is the dialog box you get when you don't have a catalog. What I did just today was I deleted the catalog. So, and now I opened Lightroom without any catalog. So it initially asked for a catalog. So without catalog, Lightroom cannot work. Now catalog is a very important part of Lightroom and it needs to be there. And all your file information of the photos, whatever editing you do, will be stored in this catalog. So this catalog is the main part of Lightroom. So that is how the bridge and Lightroom really differs. Other than that, the processing part of Lightroom and processing part of bridge are identical. Only thing is the interface is different, but processing, all the sliders, every capability is there both in bridge as well as in Lightroom. Now, I just create a default catalog. When you say default catalog, what happens is it creates a catalog within if it is Windows, within the picture folder, it creates a catalog. It creates a default catalog within the picture folder. So let me share that screen when it opens. Just give me a minute. Will not open here because I didn't import it. So when I open Lightroom for the first time, it will be a blank screen. So it will keep on showing you all the different interfaces. So these interfaces I won't go through because that's going to be another chapter. Now, basically, the story here in Lightroom is this: you have to import files. So when you import files, you can import a bunch of files. You can import your card. You can import your whole hard disk. You can import any one of those. So as of now, I'm going to import uh, a folder in my desktop, which I'm going to basically use. So I'm going to import this file. Now, those who know the routine of how to get all the files into Lightroom, you don't have to bother about this. So if you have any doubt, you ask me in the chat. So I'll answer this later. Now we'll go to the next question. I hope how to go from bridge to Photoshop. No, you can't go. You can go from bridge to Photoshop, but you can't go from bridge to Lightroom. From for Lightroom, you have to just open the Lightroom, then import photos from wherever they are. The original photos, wherever they are, you have to import. You can't drag and drop. You can't uh, just double click and open photos in Lightroom. Now, most of today's questions are in the develop module. How do you process the photograph and so on. So let me start with the one which is a very comprehensive question. It's a question which has got quite a lot of work to do. Can you please tell me how what are the steps we can be followed to edit a portrait image in Lightroom? I'll go through that because that will cover most of the answers for most of your other questions. Let me show you how I process a photo. Now Lightroom has imported all the photographs, and you can see all those photographs which I've given it to import. They are all here. Okay. Let me take one photograph and let me start processing it. Now, processing a photograph means I have captured this photograph either as a raw file or a JPEG file, because Lightroom allows you to import both raw as well as JPEG. So it doesn't matter whether you are importing as a raw or as a JPEG. The fundamental difference between a raw and JPEG is raw contains more information. Raw contains a better amount of data so that you can manipulate it, whereas JPEG is already a compressed file. So you would have lost quite a lot of color data. You would have lost especially white balance information, because it fixes the white balance, whatever white balance your camera has given it to you. If you give it auto white balance, that auto white balance is the one the camera determines, and that camera determined white balance may be good, maybe may not be good. So it all depends on how you really did. Now I've opened the same file which earlier I had opened in the Photoshop. The same file I'm opening here. Now, when you open for the first time any of the files in Lightroom, they show a preview, is what is called the embedded preview. So embedded preview is a preview which your camera has taken and that it has put on that particular photograph. Once you start editing it, that embedded preview goes off. And then what you get is a preview which is created depending on all your editing capabilities. Now remember, what you're seeing is not the original photo. It's basically a preview which is created by Lightroom, and that's what you are seeing it here. So let's start with this particular photograph. So develop module is the second module. First is the library module. I won't go into detail of a library module today's question and answer, because we have a lot of questions in the develop module, which is the most important part of Lightroom, because that's where most of the work is done. And remember, in library module, we can go for several photographs. Like I can manipulate these photographs, I can mark them, I can give them star rating, I can index them depending on their name, their quality, their f-stop, and all those things are possible in the library module. And this is where Lightroom excels. This is the part of the library part is the one which is missing in the bridge. When you try to use bridge as your sole source of editing, you won't get the library part with it. But you will be able to browse any photos using bridge. And when I click on any of the photograph and then press D for develop module, I go into a develop module. This is the second module. Okay. Now there are seven modules are there. You can use any one of the module. Library module is the one where you gather photographs, sort them, name them, add keywords, and all those capability in the library module. Then you go to the develop module where you develop each of the photographs, and then you have a map module where you can add geo points with the geographic points. Then there is a book module where you can print it as a sort of a printed book. Slideshow module for the web. You have a print module where you can individually print or multiple prints. There is also web interface where you can create slideshows. So we won't be covering any one of them, just develop module today. So let me start with this particular picture. So if I reset the picture, this is how it was captured. Now, when it is captured, it's a JPEG file. Remember, it's the JPEG file. So because it's a JPEG file, now you don't get information as far as the white balance is concerned, because the JPEG already the white balance is fixed. If I instead open up a raw file, let me go to grid view and let me open up a raw file. For example, this is a raw file. Now, if I go into develop module and if I go into the white balance, I get the same white balance as what is there in your camera. Auto, daylight, cloudy, shade, tungsten. I can get the same type of white balance, and I can manipulate the white balance depending on what I feel is the one which is correct. So most of the time, none of this is really working. So the trick what I use is I go to the eye. Now, if you go into 1:1 preview, you can go very close to the eye and then take this white balance eye drop and then start picking from that particular white of the eye. So when you take information from the white of the eye, not just need to be white of the eye, any neutral color will do. So if there is a neutral gray in the picture, you can take out of that. You can't take in one of the colored pictures or darker pictures because they are not neutral. Neutral in the sense red, green, and blue all should be in the equal value. In the real world, if they are in the equal value, so when you pick a white balance from that particular portion, I can pick from this bindi, I can pick from her teeth if they are white. Now, if she has cleaned her teeth with the toothpaste which has a salt, then definitely you can pick from her teeth also. So in these flowers are white, so I can pick up from one of these flowers, any one of them, I can pick up white balance, and that white balance is technically a correct white balance. Now, why I say technically a correct white balance? Because what happens is this may look technically correct, but aesthetically this may not look correct because this is a stage performance of this Odyssey dancer. So if I try to show her technically white balance, it looks as though she's having a studio light, uh, not having a stage light. Because stage we always assume that it's slightly reddish, so I can go for a very slightly warmer color than technically correct white balance. Very slight, not too much. So I can give that particular white balance and then proceed on that. So that is how I pick up the white balance. Let me go back to that earlier photograph of this boy. So again, in his case, I can take. So now in this case, there is no option of choosing what white balance I can use. So again, I can go for the picker, assuming that his white of the eye is white. So I can pick color from there, and soon I can see his skin tone have really improved. The only problem I have is this towel around him, and I want to separate it from the background, or I can either make the background duller or this portion brighter. So that is where all my exposure, contrast, highlight, shadow, white and black, these settings come. So these are basically exposure settings. So what's exposure? So this is basically in a histogram. If you see the histogram from this point to this point is basically my exposure setting. So when I change those settings, really the histogram changes during that middle of the histogram areas. I can in fact drag the histogram and do the same changes. This is what I'm doing now. I'm dragging the histogram right to the left. And you can see the exposure slider also moving right to the left. So both are interrelated. This is a cruder way of doing, just pushing and pulling a histogram. Whereas by going through the slider, I can do it very nicely. So if a picture is underexposed, if you shot a picture something like this, I can expose it better by going to a slightly overexposed picture by increasing the exposure. So how much you increase, it depends on whether you are seeing it correctly or not. So how do I really start? My trick is I start with this auto button. It's a easy button. Just click on auto, and Lightroom does some magic and gives you a particular ballpark setting. Now, not that Lightroom knows exactly how you have really dreamt of that particular picture. It can never do that. And in fact, you have your own ideas how the picture should look like. So what you can do is you can either accept it if you like it or don't accept. Now, in my case, I think it's slightly overexposed to my liking. So what I'm going to do is bring the exposure down slightly, not much. Don't bring it, in large quantities. Bring it slightly down. I think for -2, -3, yeah, around -3 is quite a good this thing. This is 1/3 of a stop. I have reduced it. Now, if I go for the highlights, now in this picture there are not much of highlights. Let me show you what highlights are. If I bring it down, see the background. Can you see this bluish background? Now, that's really the highlights. So that's the one which is coming down. So I like a little bit of highlights which are reduced because I don't want it to compete with the rug what is wearing. If I open up the shadows, see his hair. Hair will start looking bleached. So again, I don't want to open up the shadows too much. Whites and blacks are white points and black points. So this is the white point at this extreme corner near the 255 range of the histogram, and this is the black point. So the blacks and whites are basically measured at this particular point, and when you press auto, it automatically detects which is the white point, which is the black point. Now, when you try to print a photograph, you need to have a good white point and a good black point. Without a good white point and without a good black point, your print will not come aesthetically better. After that, the next what I do is basically go through, and none of these sliders have got really hard and fast rule telling that they should be this much or they should be this less. It's all aesthetically pleasing to your eye. If you are the photographer and if you like a particular way how it looks, go ahead and keep on manipulating it. If you manipulate it too much, usually what happens is you will end up making it look pretty artificial. So it's always better to have a minimal adjustment and try to do it as less as possible, but to give the best look you have in your mind. Now, next comes the texture. Now, texture is the one where you can see the rug, where as I increase the texture, you see these portions of the rug will start really standing out. So in this picture, I like a texture a little bit more. I won't go overboard, probably 50 texture is quite good. I won't go into clarity because once I go into the clarity, what happens is his face also becoming chunky. Now, the hard and fast rule of clarity is if it is a male, you can have a little bit of extra clarity. But if your subject is a female, don't give extra clarity because the skin pores will start looking and she won't like it. So clarity as far as possible, keep it at 0 or +5 in case of male, -5 in case of female, or -10 in case of female. Don't do too much of clarity. Now that will make it look like a plastic Barbie doll. So again, clarity, be careful how much more or how much or less what you're going to do. Dehaze I'll cover later. It's basically if a picture is hazy, you can make it hazy, something like this, or you can make it less hazy, something like that. But if a picture is not hazy, and especially if it has got a skin tone like this one, where humans are there, don't play around with the dehaze slider. Then coming to the last two part, the vibrance and the saturation, these are the two where you're manipulating the color. So when there is a skin tone, when there is a human being in the picture, as far as possible, only touch vibrance and don't touch saturation. You can give a negative saturation. You get one of those Instagram look like faded color pictures. For that, you can go for the saturation, lower saturation. But if you give higher saturation, thinking that you are going to make the picture colorful, you end up in destroying the picture because the skin tones will go pretty bad. So as far as skin tones are concerned, keep the saturation 0. If you are in the landscape photography where you want to enhance the landscape, then you can go for higher saturation. But in portrait photography or in human photography, as far as possible, stop going for extra saturation. Just stick with the vibrance. Whenever you want to have an extra oomph on that picture color, go for vibrance. So this is how I usually edit a portrait. Now, in case you want to enhance it, there are other parts of Lightroom. You have a tone curve, which I'll explain later. There is what's called a split toning, which is again not for portrait, but for landscape. I'll talk about sharpening and noise reduction. There is a question there. Lens correction is the one where if you have used a wide angle lens or a lens which gives a lot of distortion and you want to adjust the distortion, then you can go for the lens correction. You can transform the pictures if there is a sort of a building there which is sort of perspectively leaning to one side. You can change it. Then you can add vignette and post crop vignette information, like vignette, like you can add a vignette something like that, deep vignette, or you can add vignette, whitish vignette, like that. So you can adjust all these things in various sliders. So this is how I usually do any option. Now remember, whatever I did now is basically a global correction. So when I want to do a local correction, again, I'll be going through, there are questions on all these 3 brushes. So when I do a localized correction, then I go through these brushes. So let me go back to questions and then I'll come back to Lightroom. Questions, because there are several covered indexing yet. So I'll talk about indexing in the last part. I saw that you didn't come, so that's why I kept the indexing last. Now the second question, use of graduated filter, radial filter, adjustment brush. I'll show you that right now. And then one more question, how, when and where, what type of pictures to be used when the gradient filters has to be used. Okay, I'll cover both of this now. Then we'll go to the next question. When you use Lightroom, make sure that no other software will be running. For example, if your Lightroom is running slow, especially when you are working with Lightroom, make sure that you don't have a Photoshop running behind. Web browser is another one which is running, which will cause a slowdown of Lightroom, because most of our browser with a lot of tabs will consume quite a lot of memory. So if you have less memory in your laptop or a hard disk, then you can close all those programs and then Lightroom will run faster. Now let me show you these 3 brushes. Basically these 3 brushes do the same thing. There is what's called the adjustment brush. This is the first one. This is the adjustment brush. The second one is called a radial brush. The third one is called a graduated brush. So this is the adjustment brush. The shortcut is K. So when you press K key, it automatically goes into adjustment brush. Now this is like a freehand brush. So you can paint anywhere you want. Let me show you here. Now any of the brush, they have got their own settings. Now, if you see the brush, it's got 2 parts. There is a central dot. So that dot, you put it in somewhere and you get a pin there. Now, when you go over the pin, when you hover over the pin, it will show you where this particular brush has already painted. Now, in my case, it is painted, where you see that red ruby color, area, that much area it is painted. Now, my effects are going to be there in that area. So if I want to see that area all the time when I'm painting, you can press the letter O, which is the overlay. So when you press letter O, like what I've done now, so that brush overlay will be visible. So I know exactly where to brush. Now, the brush has got two parts. There is a central circle, there is an outer circle. The central circle is the one where it will really brush. The outer circle is the one which is sort of a graduated. So you can change the feathering value by going to this feather slider. So as I change the feather value here, you can see that that outer circle will keep on disappearing. So when I have a feathering value, which is absolutely 0, when I draw something, it will have no feather at the edge. So it will be sort of a, not a softer edge, but it's a hard edge brush. So in Photoshop, you have a hard edge and a soft edge brush. So here, when you give the feather 100%, you get a very soft colored brush, a soft edged brush. Sorry. Now you can also go for the flow. Flow is how far you're going to press the brush. So it's an amount of the brush stroke what is going to fall in one single push or pull. So let's say that I go into 50% flow. I have to brush it many times. So I brush once, I brush twice. It keeps on building. Thrice, 4, 5, 6, 7, until I get this was 100%. So it may be slightly more than that. 7, 8, 9, 10. So when I go for 10 times, it will be equivalent to what was there when the flow was 100%. You can reduce the flow where you don't want it to really get messy, so you can have multiple strokes so that you can slowly build up the value. The last part is the density. Density is a sort of a throttling value. Now let me show you it again. Let me go back. Let me undo all these strokes. I can easily undo by deleting that pin. So all I have to do is just go to that particular pin, press delete key, all that strokes are gone. So I can start with the fresh stroke. Now in this time, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to keep feather value to 0 just to show you, flow to 100, and density to 50. So my density is 50. Now what happens is, my flow is 100. See this. However much I keep on painting there, it will never go beyond 50%. So when I raise it to 100%, see, it will keep on raising to 100%. So that is the difference between the density and flow. The flow is, each brush stroke will keep on adding more and more layer of that particular brush. So if you keep a flow at a lower level, you keep on putting layers and layers until it becomes 100%. Whereas density will throttle it to whatever value you have kept. So if you keep it 50%, whatever the size, whatever the flow value, it won't exceed 50%. So that's basically between density and flow. Most of the time, I just keep a density to 100%, and I just manipulate with the flow. Many a times I start off with the 50% flow, and then I keep on building. Feather value, if it is a hard edge surface, then what I do is I keep a feather value as less. Then depends on softer edge, I go for the feather value which is higher. Then size is basically size of the brush. So you can make it a smaller brush or a bigger brush depending on how you're going to use. Now in this graduated brush, sorry, in the adjustment brush, you have 3 values you can keep. You can have a brush A, brush B, and erase brush. So brush B can be a different size. So it can be a smaller size brush and with the feather value 0, and A can be a larger size brush with the feather value 100. So you can alter your brush size as you're painting, so that you don't have to keep on changing your brush values. So that's the advantage of A and B brush. Also, suppose you made a mistake. See, in this case, I have made a mistake of brushing on his hair. So I can go for the erase brush and I can erase those portions. Now there is also a shortcut to go into a erase mode, that is by holding Alt key. So when I keep a Alt key, whatever I'm doing, the ulta happens. So I remember Alt as a ulta. So let me do one thing. I'm in the erase brush. So I'm erasing here, but I erase extra here. So I can hold the Alt key and then I paint there. Or I can come here to A and then paint. Now remember my flow is very less. Now I can paint it. So now remember these paint doesn't get very accurate unless you tick this auto mask. I'll show you how to do the masking and other things. Let me go through other two examples. One is called the radial filter. The other one is called a graduated filter. Let me go to a different picture so that you can be clear about it. For example, let me go to the sky picture. Now I want to make this sky darker. So this is the best tool. The graduated filter is the best tool to make a sky dark. So all I need to do is I can drag it all the way down here. So this graduated filter is different from this adjustment brush. See, adjustment brush is a free brush, so it has got all these settings which you can alter it. Now in this case, this graduated brush, basically it starts here, goes up to here, and then starts disappearing from this particular point, and then disappears completely from this area. So it's graduated right from this area to this area, and then it disappears. Now I have pulled it from top to bottom. So the same thing can be done from bottom to top. I'll show you how it is. Now let me do one thing. So now what you're seeing is a RubyLit overlay because I have a O key pressed. So if I remove that O key, you can see that it is basically showing three lines. There's one line here, there's a line here, and the line here. So my setting starts all the way here, then start disappearing here, completely disappears at this point. So this is the graduation. So if you want something to disappear very, very fast, you can bring all three lines together. Let me make it sharper so that you can see that. So basically that white balance, blue white balance, basically is disappearing right at that particular point. So I can alter the angle, I can change it however I want, but in this case sky, I want it like this, and I don't want it to abruptly end. So what I'm doing is I'm basically pulling it all the way right up to the horizon and making sure that it just disappears at the horizon. So that's how you do it. Then you manipulate whatever you want. For in this case, I've just manipulated the white balance. So you have a very cool white balance so that the sky looks bluish. Now I don't want the tint to affect it, so I can keep the tint negative. I can add the exposure because as you add the exposure, the sky becomes duller and duller and becomes more bluish. Now I want to make the sunset look golden. So what I can do is I can have one more graduated brush. Okay, and this is the second graduated brush. Now in this case, I want to make it warmer. So what I will do is I'll take the white balance of this to a warmer side. I can also add a little bit of magenta here. So this area is warmer and this area is cooler. So my picture has got beautiful blue hour sunset where sky is deep blue and the sea is golden or amber color. So it is just possible with the graduated brush. Now you can also pull the brush from this side. You can also pull one more from this side. You can have a multiple number of brushes. Each of those brushes will have a pin. So if you don't want this brush, you click on that brush and then press delete. That will disappear. Okay, I don't want this brush. So I click on that, again press delete, and it will disappear. So only two brushes, one giving a blue color to the sky, another giving an amber color. Now, let me delete both these brushes just to show you what will happen if I use radial filter. Radial filter is not ideal for this, but if I want to use a radial filter, I can use it here just to show you how radial filter basically works. Radial filter is sort of a filter which basically has a value like a like the name suggests, it's a radial filter. So you can either work with the interior of the filter or exterior of the filter. This is where you make it either inside or outside. So you click this button invert, so it will either work it on outside or work from inside. In this case, now it's working from outside. So as I change the white balance, you can see that anything outside that particular circle is the one which is getting affected. I can also make that feather value change. So I can make that feather value, as less as possible. It looks as though somebody who made a punching hole in the sky, or I can make a feather value 100 where it's very, very indistinct. Let me stop here. Let us go back to questions. I told you about the graduated filter, radial filter, adjustment brush. Now the question is when to use it. Every time you're going to need a localized change in your photograph, not the global change. Global change, you use all the other sliders, but when you want a localized change, you can use any one of these brushes. So adjustment brush is whenever you want to do a freehand brushing. Radial filter whenever you have a subject which is either round, oval, or that shaped. Graduated filter when you want to have one side of your picture getting affected, like a sky or a ground, or one edge of the picture, either the right side or the left side you want to use, then you use a graduated filter. Now all these three filters have got various sliders. You can apply those sliders. It is not just one filter, you can have multiple filters. In the sense, you can have a graduated filter. On top of that, you can have one more graduated filter. You can duplicate the graduated filter. You can have two, three graduated filter which oppose one another. For example, when I did two graduated filter, one did the bluish to the sky and the amber to the ground. They were really opposing to each other, but they gave that particular look what I wanted. So you go behind the look. Don't bother about what filters you are going to use. I think I'm clear as far as that is concerned. If you are not sure, Venkat, you can ask me a question in the chat. How and where I'm going to use a gradient filter? Again, I have answered that question. Now we'll go to the next question. What is a split tone, and how and where exactly you use a split tone? Now I'm going to use the same picture and I'm going to show you how I'm going to change using split tone. Let me read. So this is how the original sunset was. Now, okay, let me go back. Now remember, there is a trick to reset any one of your brushes. So I was in a radial brush. So all you have to do is just press Alt key, and then you have a small lettering here called effect. It will change to a reset. So when you click on the reset, all the for example, let me do something. I have all these sliders like this. So press Alt, click on the reset, everything resets. And remember, any slider anywhere in Lightroom, all you have to do is double click on the slider, it will reset. For example, if my contrast is -100, I want to bring it to 0. I don't need to pull it all the way back to 0. All I need to do is just double click on that. It will come back to 0. So this will happen to any of the sliders in Lightroom. When you want to have the whole panel reset, press Alt and then go to the top left of the panel. You'll have a reset button there. Click on the reset, so it will reset everything to 0. Now let me come to a split tone. Now split tone means, let me show you what split tone really stands for. Let me come to this page. our pictures have got lot of black, gray, and white. So this is natural progression in any picture as such. There are different values of total black. There's a shade of gray, which slowly becomes white. Now this is just an example of black to white gradient. Now if I try to do split toning here, now let me do one thing. Let me add a blue color to highlights, and let me add orange to shadows. So you noticed there is, these are the shadows, they become orange, and these are the highlights which became blue. But remember one thing, the pure white remained pure white, the pure black remained pure black. Now there is also another slider. There are two sliders here. One is called the saturation slider, which basically says how much of whites, because highlights are basically not pure whites, they are the brighter colors. So brighter colors, how much of those brighter colors will be saturated with the bluish tinge. Also, the same thing applies to the shadow. The shadow is not really black, it's darker shade of gray. So again, you can decide how much of those becomes orangish. Let me go to the real orange. This is, yeah. So that's how really I can show you exactly how you're going to have how much of uh, the gray values, whether in the bright side or in the dark side, will become that particular color. Now you can change the saturation. Also, you can change the balance. That I want more orangish. I want more bluish. Now this may look strange when I showed you in a black to white uh, a gradient picture. Let's go to a real life scenario. Let me go back to that sunset shot. Earlier I showed you the same sunset shot with the adjustment brush. Now using split tone, I can do the same thing. Now remember, these are the brighter areas and these are the darker areas. So I can use the same quality of, this is the highlights and this is the shadows. So I can make this as bluish and this as orangish. So highlights, again choose the blue. I can choose these blue, sky blue. I can adjust it to whatever blue I want. See, this is where I want that blue to be dark blue or the sky blue. Also, let me go to the shadows and pick the amber color. That's too magenta. Let me come back. Okay, somewhere here. And that's the color. Now, I can change the balance. For example, I can make this too ambery sunset or too bluish magenta sunset. So this is a combination of between these two colors. I can also bring down the amber shade. I can also increase the bluish shade. Sorry, I changed amber. Back to the blue. I can change the saturation here to whatever color I want. So that saturation value I can change of the blue, also of the orange. And if I change the balance between these two, I can go for either a total bluish sunset or total magenta and orangish sunset. So I have a freedom of moving it between these two colors, and that's where really split tone really works. You can also go for lower shade of colors on both sides, and you can play around with them. You can also change using white balance, just like what I did earlier, using the graduated filter. So there are umpteen number of ways where you can get the same results. Split tone is one of those where you can play around with two different colors, one for the highlights and one for the shadows. And you can use this as a preset, and you can also save it. Let me show you how I create this split tone preset. So all I have to do is go to the left panel, and under this user preset, so let me go here, and under the preset there is a plus mark. So when I click on this plus mark, it will allow you to create presets. So when you create a preset, give a name. So in this case, sunset preset. Sorry, split tone plus. So this is a preset I created for my split tone. Now I don't want any one of these rest of the settings which I've done checked. So what I do is check none. The only thing I want is a split tone. So I don't want to use all these auto settings, treatment, all those things. Just want split toning to be ticked, because my preset is exclusively only for split toning. So I just create that and then create it. So if you go here, just now I created this split toning. Now let me show you what happens if I apply that to another picture. This particular picture. And I want to apply that split toning to this particular picture. So all I need to do is go into the develop module, go to my preset area, click on the split toning, and that particular split toning is already applied to this particular picture. So that's all what you need to do. Then you can tweak on this. So let's say that I don't want the saturation that much, or I want sky to be more bluish. I can change it. I can change the balance to different colors, and so on. So I can give a shadow a different tone. So you can play around, starting as your preset as your starting point. So when you create a preset, it's more or less it is your starting point, and beyond that you're going to use that particular preset and then keep on adjusting.